Who is this geeky-looking guy who's being treated like a rock star? Oh, it's Congressman Ron Paul, that Texas libertarian who was ignored in Congress for decades until recently when people started talking about a Ron Paul revolution.
Sounds to me like the revolution is alive and well.
Revolution? What's he talking about? Well, for a congressman, he does have different ideas about government.
But you take care of yourself. Don't ask the government for anything.
The left mocks him for that.
I do like the theory, by the way, of self-reliance. But when you get into the real world, it doesn't work.
And many on the right don't like his anti-war views.
I don't think I've ever heard that before, and I've heard some pretty absurd explanations for September 11th.
Republicans applauded that criticism. But then, at the biggest conference of conservatives, Republicans chose him over all the presidential candidates.
Thank you.
What if he did win? What would he say in a debate against the president? Or, well, this guy?
Let me be clear. Now, the government has to lead.
Maybe if the government got out of the way, we would have high-speed transportation.
What would a Ron Paul presidency be like? That's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
For decades, we libertarians have been dismissed as a collection of naive crackpots who want government to be so limited that no serious politicians would call us anything but fringe. Some people still say that. But these days, there are more libertarians for them to contend with. Libertarians were a big part of the Tea Party, and now more politicians talk about cutting spending. Imagine that. And the one man who's probably done more than anyone to make that happen is Congressman and potential Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul. So thank you for joining us. You obviously have fans here. Things have changed recently. People are waking up, you think?
I think so. I think the people outside of Washington are waking up, and they're getting the attention of a few in Washington, but we have some more waking up to do in D.C. before they change their ways.
And with that in mind, at the last CPAC conference, where he beat the other Republicans in the straw poll, he talked about how entitlement programs are unsustainable, and as a thought experiment, he suggested this.
But would you consider opting out of the whole system under one condition? You pay 10% of your income, but you take care of yourself. Don't ask the government for anything.
There was big applause for that. And there's applause here. But when I posed that question to my studio audience, another one, young people were very skeptical. What? I wouldn't get my student loan? And Chris Matthews sneered at the idea.
You're never going to go into a federal highway again. You're never going to go to an airport that is regulated by FAA. You're never going to eat a can of tuna fish because it might inspect it for tow main. Yeah. You're going to do your own inspections for tow main. Right. You're going to inspect that.
And your own cancer research, don't forget about that. And you're going to defend yourself if invaded by Canada.
You're going to defend yourself against the enemy if anybody attacks America. Thank you. I do like the theory, by the way, of self-reliance. But when you get into the real world, it doesn't work. Thank you, David Corn. This has been too easy. This has been way too easy. John, it's not fair.
You're too easy a target. What a silly idea.
Yeah, that's what they say, but these ideas are spreading, and I think the message of liberty is alive and well and growing in this country, so therefore I'm an optimist.
Well, let's... Good, there's optimism. Let's break down what Chris Matthews said. With your 10% deal, I couldn't drive on a highway?
Well, not necessarily. You would have to say that there will be no highways, but, you know, there's a lot of roads now already are privately built or locally built, and the federal highway system is something that could be handled by a user fee
you know, before you have an alternative. That it isn't the thing that we put on the top of the list and say, you know, what we need is a revolution. We got to close down the federal highway system. So he's wrong in saying that. But he doesn't realize is there may be more money, you know, available for some of these things that are going broke. All the public things right now are running out of money. All the governments are broke.
Unregulated airports. He suggests the planes will smash into each other.
And I have this argument a lot in Washington about, you know, I will make this statement that we don't need all these federal regulations. Oh, he doesn't want any regulations. Well, when it comes to economics or airlines, you would have other people regulating, the property owners, the airlines. And
the airlines don't want to kill their customers?
That is absolutely. They might even be able to provide security. They may even be able to replace the TSA if they realize how they could do that.
He says we'll have poisoned tuna.
Tuna.
Without the government to keep the food safe.
Well, you know, what he's using is fear tactics, and they all do that, whether it's financial, foreign policy, or for environmental things. They'll just use fear to intimidate and try to get people
but people think it's the government that keeps the food safe.
Yeah, well, they think wrongly.
It's the food companies that keep their food safe because they want to protect their own reputation,
right.
Their brand.
And in a free society, they are liable and responsible. You know, I think once government comes in with the regulations and they regulate something bad, then it affects everyone and they're protected because the government said it was okay to do this.
He says there'll be no cancer research.
And he's absolutely wrong about that. There may be better directed cancer research and not politically directed research. So he's wrong on that.
He said we wouldn't be able to defend ourselves.
Well, I think we'd be a lot more able to defend ourselves because he doesn't believe much probably in the Second Amendment. And if you believe in a free society, believe in the Second Amendment, that's where your real protection comes from.
And you support defense as a role for government. If Canada attacks us, we should fight back, right?
That's right. I use Canada as a good example. We should treat all countries like Canada as our friends and trading partners and don't give them any foreign aid.
All right, well, enough for now of my questions. Let's go to the audience. They're, I think, eager to ask you some questions. So who's first? Yes, young man.
The question I have is about the debt ceiling. What is Congress going to do? Like, are they going to actually start saying we can't spend anymore? We're going to have to cut all these programs. We're going to have to cut. We're going to have to cut social.
You're right. They're probably going to raise the debt limit. If the debt limit was frozen, Congress would have to quit spending, and then government would get smaller. So the debt limit is very important. We shouldn't raise it. We should put pressure on them. But, you know, if you took away the privilege of the Federal Reserve to buy debt, this thing would all come to an end. Because if you couldn't print the money to pay for the Treasury bills, interest rates would go up, and Congress then would be forced out of economic reality. Well, the interest rates are going up because we're sucking up all the money. So, but the debt limit will probably be increased, and it's going to get a little worse before they finally get the house in order.
Yes, sir.
If you're elected president of the United States, would you, from the executive branch of government, challenge the Federal Reserve? And if so, what would be the method the executive branch of government would use to challenge the power of the Federal Reserve System?
You have to get the Congress to repeal the Federal Reserve Act and get rid of the Federal Reserve. That's what you have to do. So you would have to lead in that manner.
But all these smart people say it's the Fed that keeps us going.
I know, but you're a person and you don't agree with that. Yes, there's a lot of smart people, but they're always into special interests. The people who benefit from big government spending love the Fed, but the Fed is very, very detrimental. You cannot have big runaway government. You cannot have these deficits if you didn't have the Fed, and that's why that monetary policy is so important.
Yes, sir.
So the Ron Paul revolution that has been sparked for these last several years, what do you attribute the current popularity to, if you had to, like, the overlying factor?
Well, there's a few things. Some people give me a little bit of credit for having brought it to their people's attention a couple years ago, but that was sort of just being in a certain place at a certain time. But I think it's a combination thing. I think it's the failure of government.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Paul, my name is Nathan Cox. I'm from Virginia, and I wanted to start off by saying that you, a lot of people say that you cured their apathy, and you cured mine while I was in Baghdad in 07, 08, and I wanted to say thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Wait a second. You're in Baghdad fighting. He's saying you shouldn't be there, and that cured your apathy?
Yes, sir. I had a friend of mine from Texas who told me to check out what Ron Paul was saying while I was over there, and I started YouTubing the presidential debates that were going on over there, and everything that you said, sir, just made sense. And I started buying your books, and I started sharing that with my peers.
You know, when the campaign was going on 4 years ago, that subject, of course, came up, and it turned out that in that primary race, I got more support from the military people than all the rest put together, which made me feel good. And you know, I'm not surprised because at first I said, oh boy, that's great, that's a little surprising, but then I got thinking, you know, I was in the military for 5 years in the 60s, and I wasn't around begging, boy, I sure hope Johnson gets us more involved. I'm anxious to go over to Vietnam, you know.
With that in mind, we have barely touched on that, your biggest issue. Dr. Paul has said that our presence in the Middle East is one reason we were attacked on September 11th, and that made some people mad.
We invited the attack because we were attacking Iraq. I don't think I've ever heard that before, and I've heard some pretty absurd explanations for September 11th.
The crowd applauded Giuliani. Ron Paul's answer when we come back.
We libertarians say government is too big and it does too much. But one thing that government is supposed to do, and it says so here in the Constitution, is provide for the common defense. If people want to kill us, we need a military to defend us. But at a conference of conservatives, Congressman Ron Paul criticized conservatives who support an aggressive foreign policy.
They believe that we have this moral responsibility to use force to go around the world and say, you will do it our way or else. Well, force doesn't work. It never works.
Force never works? What about World War II? Force can work.
Defensive force, sure, it better work. You know, if you're a freedom-loving nation and somebody comes and attacks you or us, yes, we should use force in retaliation. So there's a difference in which way you're using the force.
Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer joins us now. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and he's now with the Center for Advanced Defense Studies. You differ with the congressman.
I do. I think we practically have to defend our equities. And this is where I think there's a clear division between using brute force without an end result in mind. And frankly, the bottom line, you brought up, John, you brought up World War II. Parmenides, a Greek philosopher in 485 BC, said, nature abhors a vacuum. We inherited an empire. I'm not saying it's the right thing or the wrong thing, but we have, for better or for worse, been the force of good on this planet. Not that we should be the policemen of the universe, but we have certain things that we, I think, are obligated to defend both by treaty and by our own values.
Congressman?
But the big thing is defending our interests. He implies that, you know, oil might be our interests. And yes, we have a right to defend our country, but to pose our will around the world, that's how we get into so much trouble and have gotten into so much trouble. And I've seen no benefit from it. You know, I was in high school during the Korean War, and we're still there. Vietnam, I was in during those period of time for 5 years. What a waste. And now we're in wars constantly, and we don't even defend ourselves well enough. We're out there just stirring up trouble because what do we have? We have a true blowback problem that we have to face up to. I mean, the whole idea of us imposing a dictator in Iran, the Shah, it came back to haunt us. It's still there today. And now we go into Iraq to impose our will on Iraq, and there was no threat whatsoever, zero threat.
Well, but Tony, you say we
virtually turned over Iraq to the Iranians now. They're close allies of the Iranians.
I think it's an issue. Well,
you say we need to protect our oil.